Every day, Harold endured the same complaints. Can't you move faster? Why is this taking so long? Maybe you should find a different job. The 73-year-old grocery bagger with shaking hands had heard it all for 12 years. Then one afternoon, when he collapsed from exhaustion and paramedics found his Silver Star medal, the customers who had been cruel to him learned they had been mistreating a Korean war hero. Welcome to the Untold Stories. Before we dive into this powerful story of hidden courage and forgotten sacrifice, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about our veterans deserve to be shared with the world, hit that subscribe button right now. These are the tales that remind us heroes walk among us in the most humble jobs, carrying medals and memories that most people will never see or understand. Morrison's Market had been Harold Chen's workplace for 12 long years. Every morning at exactly 8 a.m., he would clock in and take his position at the end of checkout lane 3, where his job was to carefully bag groceries for customers who were always in a hurry. At 73 years old, Harold moved with the deliberate slowness of someone whose body had endured more than most people could imagine, carrying pain in every joint. Harold's hands told the story of a lifetime of hard work and harder choices. Arthritis had twisted his fingers into gnarled shapes that made gripping items difficult and painful. Every bag he packed required careful thought and slow movements, each motion a small victory over joints that screamed in protest. But Harold never complained, never asked for easier assignments, never showed customers his daily struggle. The customers who shopped at Morrison's Market saw only what frustrated them. An elderly Asian man whose slow pace made their quick errands take longer than they wanted. They tapped their feet impatiently, checked their phones with obvious irritation, and made comments loud enough for Harold to hear. Can't they get someone faster? This is taking forever. I don't have all day for this. Harold absorbed their criticism with the same quiet dignity he had maintained for 12 years. He had learned that explaining his condition would only make customers uncomfortable, and asking for their patience would likely result in more complaints to the management. So he simply continued his work, bagging groceries with the methodical care of someone who understood that some jobs required precision over speed. What none of these impatient customers knew was that Harold Chen's careful movements weren't just the result of arthritis. They were the habits of a man who had learned to work under pressure in situations where mistakes could mean life or death. Every slow, deliberate motion was guided by muscle memory developed during 2 years of military service in Korea, where precision had been survival. The Silver Star medal in Harold's wallet had been earned on November 15, 1952, during the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. Private Harold Chen had been just 19 years old when he had crawled through enemy fire to evacuate wounded soldiers, making multiple trips across a killing zone while North Korean forces rained bullets and mortar rounds down on his position. He had saved 7 lives that day. For his actions under enemy fire, Harold had been awarded the Silver Star Medal, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor in combat. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against an armed enemy." But Harold had never talked about what he had done to earn it, never shared the story of how a teenager from San Francisco had become a hero on a frozen hillside in Korea. After the war, Harold had returned home to find a country that was ready to forget about Korea and the soldiers who had fought there. He had worked construction, raised a family, and lived a quiet life, keeping his medal and his memories locked away in a private place, where they couldn't be diminished by a world that seemed more interested in moving forward than remembering the price of freedom. When Harold's wife passed away 10 years ago, he had found himself alone with a small pension and arthritis that made most physical work impossible. The job at Morrison's Market had been a blessing, light work that kept him active and provided the human contact he needed to avoid the isolation that consumed so many elderly veterans. He was grateful for the job, even when customers made him feel invisible. Tuesday afternoon, September 23rd, started like any other day at Morrison's Market. Harold took his position at Lane 3, where the steady stream of customers provided the familiar rhythm of work that gave structure to his days. The lunch rush brought office workers grabbing quick meals, parents picking up after-school snacks, and retirees doing their weekly shopping with methodical precision. Around 2 p.m., the store became busier than usual as people rushed to complete their errands before the afternoon traffic made driving more difficult. Harold felt the familiar pressure of impatient customers, but he maintained his careful pace, knowing that rushing would only result in damaged items or poorly packed bags that might break before customers reached their cars. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh was typical of the customers who made Harold's job difficult. She arrived at his checkout lane with a cart full of groceries and an attitude that suggested the world owed her efficiency. "Can you please hurry up?" she demanded before Harold had even begun packing her items. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes, and this is taking way too long already." Harold nodded politely and began carefully placing Mrs. Walsh's items in bags, his arthritic fingers moving as quickly as they could manage without dropping anything. But his pace wasn't fast enough for Mrs. Walsh, who began making increasingly loud comments about the store's hiring practices and whether elderly employees should be working in customer service positions. "Maybe you should consider retiring," Mrs. Walsh said loudly enough for other customers to hear. "This job requires someone who can move faster than this." Harold's hands trembled slightly as he continued packing, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining his dignity while being publicly humiliated by someone who had no idea what he had sacrificed for her freedom to speak so cruelly. Other customers in line began to join Mrs. Walsh's complaints, creating a chorus of criticism that made Harold feel smaller with each passing moment. "This is ridiculous," one man muttered. "Why don't they hire people who can actually do the job?" The comments hit Harold like physical blows, each one a reminder that his service and sacrifice meant nothing to people who saw only his limitations. Harold's chest began to tighten as the stress of the situation combined with his physical exhaustion from a long day of work. He had been on his feet for 6 hours. His arthritis was flaring, and the emotional weight of constant criticism was becoming harder to bear. But he continued working, determined to finish Mrs. Walsh's order despite the pain shooting through his joints. Store manager Rebecca Martinez rushed to Harold's side as customers stepped back in shock, their complaints suddenly seeming petty and cruel in the face of an elderly man's medical emergency. "Call 911, Rebecca shouted while checking Harold's pulse and trying to keep him conscious. The same customers who had been criticizing his slow pace now watched in uncomfortable silence. Paramedics arrived within minutes, professional and efficient, as they checked Harold's vital signs and prepared him for transport to the hospital. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, Harold's wallet fell from his pocket, spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered items was something that made everyone in the store stop and stare in stunned recognition. The Silver Star medal caught the fluorescent lights of the store, its distinctive red, white, and blue ribbon unmistakable to anyone who knew military decorations. Paramedic James Rodriguez, himself a veteran, immediately recognized the significance of what he was seeing. "This is a Silver Star," he said quietly, his voice carrying the respect that such a decoration commanded. Rebecca Martinez picked up the medal with trembling hands, reading the inscription that identified it as belonging to Private Harold Chen, awarded for gallantry in action during the Korean War. The customers who had been complaining about Harold's slow pace suddenly understood that they had been mistreating a decorated war hero whose careful movements were the result of arthritis, not laziness. Mrs. Walsh's face went pale as she realized the magnitude of her cruelty toward a man who had earned his nation's third highest military decoration for valor in combat. "I didn't know," she whispered, but her words sounded hollow, even to herself. The other customers who had joined in criticizing Harold looked away in shame, unable to meet each other's eyes. As the paramedics prepared to transport Harold to the hospital, Rebecca Martinez made a decision that would change everything about how Morrison's Market treated its employees. "I'm going with him," she told her assistant manager. "This man is a hero, and I'm going to make sure he gets the respect he deserves." She carefully placed the silver star back in Harold's wallet. At the hospital, Harold regained consciousness to find Rebecca sitting beside his bed, his wallet and medal safely returned to him. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about your service?" she asked gently. Harold looked at his silver star for a long moment before answering. "Because the medal isn't about me," he said quietly. "It's about the men who didn't come home." Dr. Susan Park, the emergency room physician treating Harold, was moved by his story and his humility. "Mr. Chen," she said, "you've been working with severe arthritis for years. You should have been getting disability benefits and medical care through the VA. Why didn't you apply for the help you've earned?" Harold's answer revealed the depth of his character. "There are younger veterans who need those resources more than I do," Harold explained, his voice steady despite his physical pain. "I can still work, still contribute something to my community. As long as I can do that, I don't need to take help away from soldiers who came home with worse injuries than mine." His words left everyone in the room speechless. Rebecca Martinez made a phone call that would change Harold's life forever. She contacted the local veterans organization, the media, and the corporate headquarters of Morrison's Market. "We have a Silver Star recipient working in our store," she told them. "He's been bagging groceries for 12 years, while customers complained about his pace. This stops now." The story of Harold Chen spread quickly through the community and beyond. Local news stations picked up the story of the decorated Korean war veteran who had been mistreated by customers who didn't understand that his slow movements were the result of arthritis caused by his military service. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Morrison's Market received hundreds of calls from customers expressing their outrage at how Harold had been treated and their admiration for his service and sacrifice. The corporate office issued a formal apology and announced new policies to better support veteran employees. They also established a scholarship fund for the children of military families in Harold's name. Mrs. Walsh returned to the store the next day, not to shop, but to apologize. She found Rebecca Martinez and asked for Harold's contact information. "I need to make this right," she said, tears in her eyes. "I was cruel to a man who served his country with honor. I need him to know that not everyone is as thoughtless as I was." Rebecca gave her the information she requested. When Harold returned to work a week later, he found a completely different environment waiting for him. A small plaque had been installed at his checkout station. Harold Chen, Silver Star recipient, Korean War veteran, American hero. Customers who had once complained about his pace now waited patiently, many thanking him for his service. When Harold returned to work a week later, he found a completely different environment waiting for him. A small plaque had been installed at his checkout station. Harold Chen, Silver Star recipient, Korean War veteran, American hero. Customers who had once complained about his pace now waited patiently, many thanking him for his service. The changes went deeper than just customer attitudes. Morrison's Market had implemented new training for all employees about treating veterans with respect and understanding. They had also connected Harold with VA services that he had never applied for, ensuring that he received the medical care and benefits he had earned through his military service. Harold was initially uncomfortable with the attention and recognition, but he gradually came to understand that his story had value beyond his own experience. Veterans from across the region began visiting the store, not just to shop, but to meet the Korean War hero who had shown them that their service still mattered, even decades after they had hung up their uniforms. Young soldiers from the nearby Army base made Morrison's Market a regular stop, wanting to shake hands with the Silver Star recipient and hear stories from the Korean War. Harold began to open up about his experiences, sharing not just the heroic moment that earned his medal, but the entire experience of serving his country in a forgotten war. Mrs. Walsh became one of Harold's most regular customers, always choosing his checkout lane and always taking time to ask about his day. She had learned about the Korean War and the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge, and she made sure to thank Harold for his service every time she saw him. Her transformation from critic to supporter showed the power of understanding. On Veterans Day, Morrison's Market held a special ceremony to honor Harold and all veteran employees. The store was filled with customers, fellow veterans, and community members who had come to show their respect for a man who had served his country in war and continued to serve his community in peace. Harold spoke briefly, his words carrying the weight of experience. "I didn't fight in Korea for recognition or medals," Harold told the gathered crowd. "I fought for the idea that all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their age, their limitations, or their circumstances. Every day I come to work, I try to honor that principle by treating every customer the way I would want to be treated." Harold continued working at Morrison's Market until he was 78 years old, when he finally retired with the full honors and benefits he had earned through his military service. His checkout station became a permanent memorial to veteran employees, and the store established an annual award for employees who demonstrated the same quiet courage and dedication that Harold had shown. Harold Chen proved that heroism doesn't end when the war is over. It continues in every act of service, every moment of dignity maintained under pressure, every choice to treat others with respect despite how they treat you. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought, not on foreign soil, but behind grocery checkout counters where patience and perseverance are the true measures of character. Subscribe to honor all veterans